But I want to start with something. I'll double click on something that Kerry mentioned earlier, which is just touching on how AI might affect our business, the global technology and business services business, because it's going to quite materially. And let me touch on how and why. So I don't know who was around at the time, but in 1999, Mark Benioff launched a company called Salesforce, and they developed one of the first software as a service platforms, Salesforce.com. And in 2001, they led a groundbreaking marketing campaign saying that software was dead, and it really took off. People really took notice of this. And the point was, the way people bought software pre-Salesforce and pre the software as a service market was they would buy a license to something, they would install it in their data center, they would run it, they would have it maintained by the vendor, and that's what they did. What Salesforce spearheaded really was the move to a software as a service model where you didn't buy software, you rented software, you subscribed to software, and you used it in your business in a much more material way. That was back in 2001. It took quite a long time before SaaS became pretty much the only way we now buy software. I mean, who buys anything material that they put in their data center unless you're in a defense business or something? You just don't. So SaaS has now become the main component of how we deliver software to our business. But in 2024, what we're starting to see is the advent of the end of software as a service and the emergence of something different. Let me just take a sideways step. If you think in pre-2012, the majority of technology and business services were being delivered by people. There was some technology underpinning what they did, but the majority of work was work done by people. 2012 was really the maturity of something that became known as robotic process automation, which is pretty prevalent now in almost all service delivery, whether it's internal to an organization or from a service provider. And that reduced the reliance on people because the robots, if you like, this technology was doing the work of the people. And although automation had existed before RPA was quite groundbreaking because it meant that you could deliver automation without changing the underlying systems or the underlying processes. So it was much more frictionless in terms of its ability to deliver change. But what we're seeing now with the emergence of really capable, really capable artificial intelligence is some of the limitations of what you could automate with RPA being removed. Because what RPA could do is automate structured processes using structured data. And there's quite a limitation to what structured processes exist within a business and what structured data is available to inform that process. What you can now do with artificial intelligence is automate processes that aren't structured. You can automate decision making with unstructured data and unstructured processes. So the number of things that can be delivered through automation is vastly, vastly more than can be delivered with RPA. And that's what we're starting to see emerge. So how does that manifest itself as service as a software? So if you think about how services were delivered, or how they're delivered today, frankly, an enterprise either hires full-time employees to do work, or they hire a service provider who provides full-time employees to do work. The enterprise or the service provider buys some automation technology. They configure the automation to do some of the work to make them more efficient. They manage the automation. They set the priorities of what's done in what order, and they direct the tasks to manage the work. So fundamentally, the enterprise itself or the service provider they've given the service to is responsible for delivering that work. That's their responsibility. What's going to happen, what's starting to happen with service as software is the enterprise is going to buy work, not people. They're going to buy the work. And the work will be delivered in large part by AI agents that have been set free to do the work. And those AI agents, powered by large language models, are able to converse in the same way a human would, are able to read and interpret data, whether it's structured or unstructured, are able to generate output, are able to set their own priorities, are able to direct their own tasks. And the AI software provider is responsible for delivering the work. That's the fundamental change. Let me give you a few examples. So Salesforce, who I mentioned earlier, they are now charging for their AI agents by the conversation. So every conversation you have with Salesforce's AI agents, you pay them $2. So it's a very fundamentally different model to paying a subscription based on the number of Salesforce users you have in your organization. you're paying for the work they're doing. Zendesk is a provider of, is that not moving? A provider of, no. Can you hit the button for me, Shivani?
That's why you need humans, not me.
That's not working either. Yeah. There we go. So Zendesk, a provider of service management software, are charging by the successful outcome. So they'll only charge you for the work if the work is successfully done with no human touching it. It's quite easy in a service desk management system. It's a little bit more difficult in something like a sales process where the attribution of success might not be purely about the product. 11x are a company that provide artificially intelligent sales resources. They charge you for the tasks they do. An Open Dialogue, my own business, we charge you on either of those bases. So either for the number of conversations you have or for the execution of the task. And the size of the prize for the software vendors is huge. These are Gartner's estimates. The size of the global software market, $700 billion. The size of the value of the number of employees, 3 trillion. The value of outsourced full-time employees, another 2.3 trillion. So that $4.6 trillion market is going to be attacked by software vendors selling units of work. And that is going to fundamentally change the world of technology and business services. Is it going to happen overnight? No. It took 20 years for the SaaS to become the prevalent way we buy software. It'll take that long probably for this change to happen, but it'll happen. It's coming and we need to be aware of it. There we go. Some food for thought. Right, I'm going to change tack slightly and just talk a little bit about the AI lab. So this is one of the GSA working groups that has been assembled to really look at taking a position on AI and gathering a unique perspective. And the GSA does have a unique perspective because it represents both sides of the equation. We've touched on that a few times today. It represents both the buyers of technology and business services and the providers of technology and business services and all of the people in the ecosystem that support those deliverables happening. So it has quite a unique place and quite a unique perspective and quite a unique ability to take a lens that covers both sides of the equation. And one of the things that the GSA has done is put together a working group, AI lab, as Kerry started to call it, to really think about what are the main themes and what are the things that we can do to help this community with best practice around our use of this technology and the governance of our use of this technology. So I'm on part of that working group. Michelle, who spoke before me, is also part of that working group, and there are 4 or 5 others of us. We are looking for more input. So if there's people in this room or there's colleagues that you have in your organizations that you think might help to support this work, then please put them forward. We'd love to have more people involved because it is like everything the GSA does. It's a community thing by the people for the people. But the initial things that we've done is really looked at, well, what should we focus on? And what we've decided is that the start point should be is to really get an understanding of what's going on in the organizations that you all work for. And really we've hit on 4 themes that we'd like to drill into, and we're going to imminently be asking a series of questions, so sending out this survey to your organizations for either yourselves or your colleagues to respond to really get a point of reference, I guess, for what's going on in your organization. So the first agenda item, I guess, is identification of the risks. As Michelle mentioned, identification of the risks. So the kinds of questions are, what are the identified risks in your industry, in your supply domain, universal risks, and what mitigation measures have you identified that you might take or you might consider taking? And the outcome that we're looking for is that over time, the GSA will build a sourcing-specific AI governance framework. And I say sourcing-specific because it's important that we recognise we're not trying to create a governance framework for the universal use of AI anywhere in any business. We're saying that in the world of delivery and buying of technology and business services, what should you think about in terms of AI governance? So we can create something that is very GSA specific. The second point is best practices in contracting. We've got, I don't think he's in the room, is he? We've got a legal representative as part of this working group, and we're thinking through how does AI change contracting relationships, or should it change contracting relationships? How does it change how you price? How does it change how you risk? How does it change how you think about exit? To Chris's point, the idea being we'll create some best practice guidelines for contracting for the use of AI, and that's the contracting for the AI itself. And particularly if you think about my previous points about selling AI vendors selling units of work, actually that's really important that we think about how you contract for that. So some best practice guidelines for how you should contract for both the procurement of the AI, but the procurement of services that are delivered by or with or using artificial intelligence in some way. The third is AI readiness and organizational governance. So this is amplifying the stuff that Alistair talked about earlier in terms of the SPSI assessment for organizational readiness, digging a little bit more into the detail about what is the state of your organization, what readiness challenges do you face, what frameworks are you using, which of these frameworks, and again, they're going to change and change quite rapidly, so it's important we understand. And really the objective of this piece is to baseline. Where is everybody at? Where's our market at? Where are our organizations at? And then from a baseline, how do we work on how to improve that? And then the final piece, emerging use cases and practical adoption. This is really about understanding what's going on and what are people doing. The goal, as it says at the bottom, is to build a repository of how AI is being used in our industry, in our organizations, both in use and things that are planned. Now, one of the challenges with any emerging technology, particularly if it's giving commercial advantage, people are quite reluctant to talk about it. It's quite difficult to build a body of case studies and reference points. So we are, of course, very happy for these to be completely anonymized, but we would urge everybody to share what's going on in their organization for the greater good of the industry, so that we can learn from each other. That's the point. That's why we're all here. That's why we're all members of the GSA. So those are the 4 work streams. As I said, we'll be distributing that questionnaire and looking for input. Please do support it, or pass it to your colleagues and have them support it. And as I said at the start, if there's anybody that would like to become part of the working group, we'd be delighted to have more input, more voices, more seats at the table. Good. Well, I said I was cantering, so I've got one more topic to do before. Am I the last person before we finish? Oh, okay. So before we hand to Gary. And that's the topic of this session was sustainable strategic sourcing. So it'd be remiss of me not to talk about sustainable AI. Michelle talked about the use of AI to deliver sustainability improvements, and of course, there are a number of examples, supply chain improvements, or a number of examples of how and where AI can be used to deliver sustainable outcomes. But of course, there is a counter to that, and that is the fact that these artificial intelligence models, large language models, generative AI, GPTs, consume huge amounts of data center power, huge amounts of energy, and therefore there is a flip side to the benefits of using AI, and that is that the use of AI is quite significantly damaging to our planet, and there's quite a lot of things being done. And if I'd have had the slides that aren't there anymore, I had some statistics from the World Economic Forum about the level of power consumption used by artificial intelligence models. And I think their statistic was the power consumption of AI models is doubling every 100 days. And by 2028, it'll consume the same amount of power as Iceland. So really significant models. The good news is there's things that you can do about it, and there are tests being done to say, well, how can you limit it? For example, limiting the power consumption of the AI model by about 10%. So effectively saying don't use any more power than this, by about 10% only delivers a 3% increase in the time it takes to do something. So that's an interesting statistic. So actually there are things that you can do to manipulate the way models are used that allows you to reduce their impact, reduce their power consumption. If you think about the things that an AI model does, there's kind of 2 aspects to it. One is training the model, and one is using the model. So training it on your data and then using the data in your process. Actually, training the model takes about 20% of the power. Using the model takes about 80% of the power. So if you can reduce the need for training, then actually you can reduce the power consumption by up to 20%. And actually, if you look at the maturity of some of the large language models that are out there, they are now peaking because there is limited amounts of more training you can give them. So if you can use an existing model without needing to train it more specifically on new data, you can reduce the power consumption of your use of AI by up to that 20%. There are other things you can do in the way that you use AI that allow you to reduce consumption, and that is not to always use it. So if you build a solution, a chatbot, for example, in ChatGPT, then everything you ask it and everything it responds with will use a large language model, will use AI. If you build a chatbot or an AI agent in a commercial model, it allows you to think and control when AI is used and when AI is not used. And there are a number of things that don't need a large language model to serve the answer. For example, if you want to know who Kerry Hallard is, there's an empiric piece of data that you could supply that says that's who Kerry Hallard is. You don't need a large language model to use that. And if you don't need to use a large language model, you won't consume AI capability to do that. The other thing that you can do is very carefully manage how you ask and respond to questions and what you use to generate things. So example, I did this exercise yesterday. So if you ask the AI, tell me about climate change, that will consume a huge amount of resources interpreting that question, understanding that question, surfacing the answer to that question, and then generating a response, a written response that's cohesive, that makes sense to that question, because you asked a hugely open-ended question. If you ask a much narrower question, tell me the top 3 impacts of climate change, it'll consume about 60% of the resources to deliver that answer, because it hasn't had to think through, hasn't had to look at so many permutations of an answer. So you've now got a 40% more efficient model. If you then say, tell me the top 3 impacts of climate change in 50 words or less, it'll lose another 10% of capacity. So it's now 50% of what it would have taken to ask the open-ended question. So just being aware, I guess, of how you are using these models to deliver you an answer, and conscious of the need for efficiency, can have a huge impact on the way that these AI models are used. The good news is you can control them if you use the right tool. Shameless plug here. If you use Open Dialogue, for example, other tools are available, but we're just the best one. Then you can actually build these controls into the way that you use artificial intelligence and deliver a more sustainable use of these hugely powerful technologies. There you go. I think I remembered it all. Good. That's me. Thank you.